Her husband left her for dead, but a lonely farmer appeared to save her. What he didn't know was that by extending his hand, he was opening the door to a forbidden romance. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised by this story. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. Sarah remained motionless for a long moment, her ears attentive to every night sound. The silence that followed, the footsteps was more deafening than any scream. Her bare feet touched the cold wooden floor as she walked to the window, the curtains trembling with the wind that infiltrated through the cracks. Through the foggy glass, she could only glimpse shadows dancing between the trees, like ghosts of a past that refused to die. The hat on the table was made of dark leather, worn by time and use. She recognized it immediately. It was his, Richard's, the man who once promised to take care of her, who whispered sweet words in her ear only, to transform them into fists and tears when no one else was looking. The man she thought she had left behind on that dusty road, along with her blood and her shattered dignity. But now he was there, somewhere in the darkness, hunting her as he always did. Sarah headed to the cabinet where Ethan kept the spare shotgun. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a deep anger that she had learned to control during all those months of recovery. She would no longer be the defenseless woman that Richard had left to die. Her fingers closed around the cold metal of the gun, and for the first time in a long time, she felt in control. The sound of low voices reached her, coming from the direction of the barn. One of them was unmistakably Ethan's. Deep, controlled, dangerous. The other made her blood freeze. Richard always had that drawling tone, as if the words were poisonous honey dripping from his lips. "You don't know who you're messing with, friend." Richard's voice cut through the night air like a blade. "This woman is mine. She always has been, and I've come to take her back." Sarah approached the door, each step calculated to make no noise. Through a crack in the wood, she could see the two men face to face in the muddy yard. Ethan held his shotgun with the same naturalness with which he held the reins of his horse, as if it were an extension of himself. Richard was unarmed, at least apparently, but Sarah knew he never needed weapons to cause pain. "She isn't anyone's property," Ethan replied, his voice carrying an authority that came from years of living alone, defending his land, building his own law. "And if she wanted to go with you, she would have gone already." Richard laughed, a sound that Sarah knew well, the laugh that came before the violence, before the hands that hurt, and the words that cut deeper than any physical wound. "You think she told you everything?" Richard took a step toward Ethan, testing the limits. "You think you know who she really is? What she did?" Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the past materialize around her like a toxic fog. Richard had always known exactly where to press to cause the most pain. He had always known how to use her secrets against her, to turn her own story into a weapon. "She killed a man," Richard continued, savoring each word. "With her own hands. It wasn't self-defense, it wasn't an accident. It was coldly calculated, and then she ran away, like a coward." The silence that followed was as heavy as a stone on Sarah's chest. She watched Ethan, looking for signs that he would believe Richard's lies, that he would distance himself from her as everyone else did when they discovered the truth, or at least the distorted version that Richard always told. But Ethan remained impassive, the shotgun still firm in his hands. "Even if that were true," he finally said, "it wouldn't change anything. She stays if she wants to stay." It was at that moment that Sarah knew. It wasn't just gratitude she felt for this man who had picked her up from the road like an injured animal. It wasn't just the relief of having found safety. It was something much greater, something that scared her because it meant vulnerability. It meant having something to lose again. It meant love. Richard realized that his first strategy had failed. Sarah knew him well enough to see the change. In his posture, the way his shoulders hardened and his hands closed into fists. He had never accepted no for an answer, never tolerated that something he considered his be denied to him. "Very well," Richard muttered, slowly backing away. "If that's how you want it, then that's how it will be. But you don't know who you're dealing with. I have resources, I have contacts. I can turn your lives into hell." "You can try," Ethan simply replied. Richard smiled, but it was the smile of a predator who found prey more resistant than expected. "Oh, I'll do more than try. I'll be back, and when I come back, I won't be alone. And you," he pointed in the direction of the house, as if he could see Sarah through the walls. "You'll be begging to come back to me." He walked away backward, keeping his eyes fixed on Ethan until he disappeared into the darkness. The sound of an engine starting echoed in the distance, followed by the noise of tires on the wet earth moving away. Ethan remained motionless for long minutes after the sound of the car completely disappeared. Sarah watched him, studying every line of tension in his shoulders, every controlled movement of his breathing. He knew that had been just the first advance, that Richard would return with reinforcements and more elaborate strategies. When Ethan finally entered the house, Sarah was in the kitchen, preparing coffee with hands that no longer trembled. She had made a decision during those minutes of waiting. "You heard," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I heard." Sarah poured coffee into 2 cups, the hot steam rising like incense between them. "And you heard what he said about me." Ethan accepted the cup she offered him, his fingers brushing hers in a touch that sent waves of heat through Sarah's skin. "I heard lies," he replied with simplicity. Sarah studied him for a long moment. In the weak lamplight, the scars on his face seemed deeper, older. He was a man who understood pain, difficult choices, second chances. "And if they weren't lies?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan put the cup on the table and took a step toward her. Sarah felt her heart quicken, not from fear, but from an anticipation that consumed her from within. He raised his hand, gently touching her face, his thumb tracing a soft line along her cheek. "We all carry ghosts," he murmured. "We've all done things we're not proud of. The difference is that some of us learn to live with these scars, and others spend their entire lives trying to infect them." The distance between them disappeared like mist in the sun. When Ethan's lips touched hers, Sarah felt something shatter inside her chest. But it was a necessary destruction, like that of a dam that needs to be broken for the waters to find their natural course. The kiss was different this time, different this. There was no longer the desperate urgency of the first encounters, nor the careful hesitation of the days that followed. It was a kiss of recognition, of acceptance, of 2 wounded human beings who decided to stop running from each other. Sarah's hands rose to Ethan's chest, feeling the tense muscles under the cotton shirt. He gently pressed her against the kitchen counter, his warm body molding to hers, as if they had been made to fit exactly like this. "Sarah," he whispered against her lips, her name sounding like a prayer in his hoarse voice. She responded by pulling him closer, her fingers tangling in the dark hair at the nape of his neck. For a moment, the outside world ceased to exist. There was no Richard, no threats, no past or future. There was only the sensation of Ethan's lips on hers, the warmth of his hands on her waist, the weight of his body against hers. But the moment was interrupted by the distant sound of dogs barking. Ethan immediately pulled away, all the muscles in his body tensing like those of a feline about to attack. He didn't leave, Sarah murmured, the realization falling on her like cold water. Ethan nodded, his eyes already turning to the shotgun leaning against the wall. He was never going to leave. Men like him don't give up. They just change tactics. Sarah felt the weight of the gun in her hands, remembering the sensation of power it had brought. Then let's give him what he's looking for. Ethan looked at her with an expression that mixed admiration and concern. This isn't just any hunt, Sarah. He knows you, knows how you think, how you react. He has the advantage. He thinks he knows me, she corrected, lifting her chin in a demonstration of determination that Ethan recognized, the same one that had kept her alive when he found her on that road. But the woman he knew died that day. The woman who is here now is different. Ethan studied her face in the flickering lamplight. Sarah was right. She had changed. The months of recovery, of silence, of small gestures of affection had transformed something fundamental within her. She was no longer the broken woman he had picked up from the road. She was something new, something more dangerous, something worth fighting to protect. Then let's finish this, he said, extending his hand to her. Together. Sarah intertwined her fingers with his, feeling the strength and determination pass between them like an electric current. For the first time since Richard appeared, she smiled, a small smile, but a real one. Together, she agreed. And as they walked to the door, preparing to face the demons that awaited them in the darkness, Sarah realized that she was no longer fighting just to survive. She was fighting for something much greater. She was fighting for a life that was finally worth living. The darkness of dawn swallowed them as soon as they stepped outside the house. The wind had ceased, leaving a heavy silence that made each leaf that moved under. Their feet sound like a scream of alert. Sarah followed Ethan across the uneven terrain, her senses sharpened by adrenaline. She knew this feeling, the hypervigilance that came when survival depended on every decision, every movement, every breath. Ethan stopped abruptly, raising his hand in a gesture for her to do the same. His ears caught what hers had not yet perceived. The almost imperceptible sound of branches being broken, steps trying to be too silent to be natural. Richard was not alone, as they had imagined. He had brought company. "How many do you think there are?" Sarah whispered, her mouth so close to Ethan's ear that he felt the warmth of her breath. "3, maybe 4, he replied in the same low tone. Richard always preferred favorable odds. Sarah nodded. This was typical of him, never to face a fair fight when he could manipulate the circumstances in his favor. During the years they spent together, she had learned to recognize his behavior patterns, the strategies he used to maintain control over situations and people. They moved more slowly now, using the shadows of the trees as cover. Ethan's farm was extensive, with dense woods that offered an advantage to those who knew the terrain, and Ethan knew it like the back of his hand. Every hidden trail, every depression in the terrain, every tree that could serve as a hiding place. It was when they went around the barn that Sarah saw the first of them, a stocky man dressed in black, holding something that shone faintly in the moonlight, a gun. She recognized the type immediately, one of the thugs that Richard used to hire for his special jobs, people without scruples willing to do anything for money. Ethan had seen him too, his muscles tensed like those of a predator about to attack. Sarah could feel the change in him, the transformation of the gentleman who had taken care of her for months into the warrior he needed to be to protect what was his. Without making a sound, Ethan moved. Sarah watched, fascinated and terrified at the same time as he approached the man from behind. There was no struggle, no resistance, just a quick, precise movement, and the thug collapsed to the ground, unconscious. "I learned it in the war," Ethan murmured when he returned to her side, noticing her expression of surprise. "Some lessons you never forget," Sarah nodded, but a part of her wondered what other war lessons Ethan carried with him, what other skills he had been forced to develop to survive. They continued moving, more confident now. But the confidence turned to alarm when Sarah realized they had fallen into a trap. The steps they heard, the noises in the woods, everything had been a distraction. While they were hunting the thugs in the shadows, Richard had entered the house. The realization came when they saw a light turn on in the kitchen window, where minutes before there had been only darkness. Sarah felt her heart sink. He was in there, messing with their things, invading the sanctuary that she and Ethan had built together. "Son of a bitch," Ethan muttered, the first curse word Sarah had heard him say in all those months. The anger in his voice was palpable, dangerous. They ran back to the house, abandoning any pretense of discretion. When they reached the kitchen door, they found it wide open. Richard was sitting at the table, drinking the coffee that Sarah had prepared, as if he were the owner of the place. "I thought you had gotten lost," he said, smiling with that expression that Sarah knew so well, the smile of someone who knew he had already won before the fight even began. Ethan raised the shotgun, but Richard shook his head, making an almost paternal gesture. "I wouldn't do that. Friend, my men are positioned outside. At the slightest sign of trouble, they come in shooting. And I guarantee they are not as careful as I am when it comes to preserving lives." Sarah took a step forward, placing herself between Ethan and Richard. It was a familiar dynamic. She had always been the mediator, the one who tried to prevent explosions before they happened. "What do you want, Richard?" Her voice was firm, controlled. "You know what I want," he replied, rising from the chair with slow, deliberate movements. "You, back where you belong." "I don't belong to anyone." Richard laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the air like broken glass. "Oh, Sarah, always so naive. Do you really believe you can start over? That you can simply forget who you are, what you did?" Sarah felt Ethan move behind her, an almost imperceptible movement, but she knew him well enough to know that he was preparing to act. Discreetly, she extended her hand backward, lightly touching his arm in a signal for him to wait. "I remember perfectly who I am," she said, "and that's exactly why I know I'll never go back to you." Richard's expression changed. The false smile disappeared, replaced by something much more dangerous, pure, unfiltered anger. "You killed my brother," he said, each word loaded with venom. "You killed Mark in cold blood and then ran away like a coward." The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Sarah felt Ethan stiffen behind her, but not from judgment or repulsion. She sensed in him the recognition of someone who understood what it meant to be forced to make impossible choices. "I defended myself," Sarah finally said, her voice low but firm. "He was killing me, Richard, slowly, systematically, and you knew, you always knew. Mark was disciplining you, teaching you respect. Mark was raping me." The words came out like a slap, raw and brutal, every night, for months. "And when I begged you to help me, you said I should feel honored by his attention." Ethan made a sudden movement, but Sarah contained him again. This was her fight, her truths to be told. "So one night when he came to my room drunk and violent as always, I was ready. I had a kitchen knife hidden under the pillow, and when he grabbed me by the hair and tried to force me, I stuck it in his neck." Richard was pale now, his fists clenched. "He was my brother." "And I was a human being," Sarah shot back, "with the right to live without being tortured every night." It was then that Ethan spoke, his voice low but loaded with an authority that made even Richard take a step back. "Get off my property, now." Richard studied him for a long moment, then turned his attention back to Sarah. "You think he'll accept?" You when he knows the whole truth, when he discovers that you're not just an innocent victim, but a murderer. I already know, Ethan said simply. And it doesn't change anything. Sarah felt something break inside her chest, but it was a good break, like the cracking of a seed shell that can finally sprout. For the first time in her life, someone accepted her completely, with all her scars and her acts of desperation. Richard realized that he had lost his main psychological weapon. His posture changed, becoming more aggressive, more desperate. Very romantic, he growled. But you don't understand who you're dealing with. I have contacts in the police, Sarah. I can make your life a living hell. I can have you arrested for murder. You can try. Ethan repeated the same words he had said earlier. Oh, I'll do more than try. Richard headed for the door, but stopped. At the threshold, you have 48 hours. After that, I'll be back with arrest warrants and the full force of the law. Sarah comes back with me willingly, or she goes with me in handcuffs. The choice is yours. He left, leaving the door open. The sound of footsteps and voices gradually moving away confirmed that he and his men had really left this time. Sarah collapsed into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. All the confrontation, all the adrenaline disappeared at once, leaving her exhausted. Ethan knelt beside her, his large hands enveloping hers. Was he bluffing? She asked, although she already knew the answer. No, men like Richard always have. Contacts in useful places. He can probably do exactly what he said. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of an entire decade of fleeing about to collapse upon her. Then I have to go, she whispered. I have to get out of your life before he destroys yours too. Ethan stood up and went to the window, observing the darkness outside. For a long moment, Sarah thought he would agree with her, that he would recognize it was the sensible thing to do. Instead, he said, "There's a town in Montana. It's called Clear Waters. My brother has a property there, quite isolated. Nobody knows us. Nobody asks questions." Sarah looked at him, confused. "What are you saying?" Ethan turned to her, and in the faint lamplight, Sarah could see something in his eyes that she had never seen before. An iron, unwavering determination. "I'm saying we're going to disappear, together. Ethan, you don't understand. This means giving up everything, your farm, your life here, your identity, because of me." He approached her, kneeling again at her side. "This farm is just a place, Sarah. This identity is just a name. But you're the first thing that has made me want to truly live in the last 10 years. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. No one had ever sacrificed so much for her. No one had ever considered her worthy of such sacrifice. "You barely know me," she whispered. "There could be other things in my past. Other..." Ethan silenced her by gently placing a finger on her lips. "I know what matters. I know that you're strong enough to survive hell and come out the other side still capable of loving. I know you make coffee better than anyone I've ever met. I know that you have nightmares, sometimes, but you don't let them define you. I know that when you smile, really smile, not just out of politeness, your whole face changes." Sarah's tears fell freely now. "I know you have a small scar on your left shoulder that gets redder when you're nervous. I know you sing softly when you think no one is listening. I know you put too much sugar in your tea and too little salt in your food." Sarah laughed through the tears. It was true. She had never learned to cook properly. "And I know," Ethan continued, his hands moving to frame her face, "that I'm in love with you in a way I didn't know was possible." The kiss that followed was different from all others. There was no urgency, no desperation. It was a kiss of promise, of commitment, of two human beings deciding that they had found something worth fighting to preserve. When they separated, Sarah rested her forehead against his. "Clear waters," she asked. "Clear waters," he confirmed. "When do we leave?" "Before dawn. The less time we give Richard to organize, the better." Sarah nodded, then pulled away to look into his eyes. "Ethan, are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. You can never return to this life." He smiled, a small smile, but genuine. "This life ended the moment I found you on that road. I just hadn't realized it yet." They spent the next hour hastily packing. Sarah didn't have much. Some clothes, some personal items. Ethan also traveled light, taking only the essentials. Documents, some money he had saved, the shotgun. When they were about to leave, Sarah stopped at the threshold of the door and turned to take one last look at the house that had been her refuge for so many months. "Will you miss it?" Ethan asked. Sarah thought about the question for a moment. The house had given her security, healing, a place to rebuild herself. But what really mattered, the feeling of being at home, of belonging somewhere, wasn't in the walls or the furniture. "No," she finally said, "home isn't a place, it's a person." Ethan extended his hand to her. "Then let's go home." Sarah intertwined her fingers with his, and together they walked to the truck that would take them to a new life. As they moved away from the farm, Sarah didn't look back. For the first time in a decade, she was running towards something, not away from something. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't running alone. The truck disappeared on the dusty road, swallowed by the darkness that precedes dawn. And in the silence that was left behind, only the wind whispered among the trees, carrying with it the ghosts of a past that had finally been left where it belonged, in the past. The road stretched infinitely before them, a dark ribbon cutting through the plains that vanished on the horizon. It had been 3 days of travel, 3 days of small, dusty towns, lonely gas stations, and nights sleeping in the truck cab, pressed against each other under the stars of the countryside. Sarah had lost count of how many times she had looked in the rearview mirror, looking for signs that they were being followed. So far, nothing. Ethan drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on her leg, a constant touch that reassured her more than any words could. They had spoken little during the first part of the journey, still processing the intensity of the last few days, still adjusting to the new reality of being fugitives together. It was only on the second night, when they stopped at a roadside motel with peeling walls and noisy air conditioning, that the true intimacy began to develop between them. Not just the physical, although there was that too, a growing tension that made the air vibrate whenever their bodies touched casually, but something deeper, the intimacy of two people who had chosen to bet their lives on each other. "Tell me about your brother," Sarah had asked that night, lying side by side on the narrow bed, listening to the distant rumble of trucks on the road. "What makes you think we can trust him?" Ethan remained quiet for so long that she thought he had fallen asleep. Then his voice cut through the darkness, low and careful. "Matthew is 3 years younger than me. When I came back from the war, he was married, with 2 small children. I wasn't well. I couldn't be around people, couldn't sleep without waking up screaming. Matthew offered me the farm, said I needed a place to heal." Sarah turned on her side, studying his profile in the faint light coming from the window. "And did it work?" "For a while. Solitude can be medicine or poison, depending on the dose." He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "But you brought me back to the land of the living." Sarah extended her hand, gently touching his face. There was a vulnerability in his words that made her want to protect him, even knowing that he was more than capable of protecting himself. "What happened in the war?" Ethan covered her hand with his, keeping it pressed against his face. Things that taught me that sometimes killing is necessary to survive, but they also taught me that surviving without a reason to live isn't worth much. Sarah understood. She herself had learned similar lessons, albeit under different circumstances. Violence as a last defense, survival as a basic imperative, and then the emptiness that comes when you realize that merely existing is not the same as living. It was on that night that they made love for the first time. It wasn't the desperate encounter that the months of accumulated tension might have suggested. Instead, it was slow, careful, full of silent discoveries. Ethan's hands tracing the scars on her body as if they were maps of battles won. Sarah's lips finding every mark, every tension in his muscles, offering wordless consolation. When Sarah woke up the next morning, her first thought was that she had never felt so safe in her life. The second thought was that this feeling of safety could be dangerous. It could make her lower her guard exactly when she needed to be most alert. As if the universe wanted to confirm her fears, the motel phone rang. Ethan answered, his voice still hoarse from sleep. Sarah saw his expression change, the muscles tensing like violin strings. "Who is it?" she whispered. "Matthew." He covered the receiver with his hand. "He says some men showed up at his property yesterday, asking questions. About me, about us." Sarah's stomach dropped. Richard had found them faster than they expected. What did he tell them? That he hadn't seen me in years. But Sarah... Ethan ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that she had already learned to recognize as a sign of extreme stress. "He says we can't go there. It's too risky now." Sarah sat up in bed, pulling the sheets to cover her naked body. In a few hours, they had gone from fugitives with a destination to fugitives with nowhere to go. "Is there somewhere else?" she asked. Ethan finished the call and stared at the phone for a long moment. "Yes," he finally said. "But you're not going to like it." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Try me. My ex-wife lives in a small town called Green Valley, on the border with Mexico. She has an inn there, isolated place, far from everything." "Your ex-wife." Sarah repeated the words, trying to process the information. In all the months they had spent together, Ethan had never mentioned an ex-wife. "Her name is Carly. We divorced 5 years ago when I came back from the war. She couldn't handle what I had become." Sarah studied his expression. There was pain there, but it was old pain scarred over. "And you think she would help us? Carly is a good person. If I explain the situation..." "Ethan," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm, "are you sure there's nothing more between you? Because I won't be the other woman in your life. I've lived through enough drama." He turned. To her, his eyes serious. "Sarah, what I felt for Carly died in the war, along with a part of me that never came back. What I feel for you is something completely new, something I didn't even know it was possible to feel." She studied him for a long moment, looking for signs of lies, of hesitation. She found none. "Then let's go to Green Valley." The journey to Green Valley took 2 more days. As they approached the border, the landscape gradually changed. The vast expanses of plains gave way to more arid, rocky terrain. The towns became smaller, more sparse. The people they met at gas stations spoke with different accents, mixing English with Spanish words. Sarah felt as if they were moving to the end of the world, and perhaps that was exactly what they needed. It was during this part of the trip that she began to talk to Ethan about her life before Richard. About her childhood in Chicago's South Side, the mother who worked 3 jobs to support them, the school where she was the only one in her class who dreamed of going to college. "I wanted to be a lawyer," she said one afternoon, watching the distant mountains approach. I wanted to defend people like my mother, people who never had a fair chance in life. What happened? Sarah smiled bitterly. Richard happened. I was 18, working at a diner near the college to pay for my studies. He showed up there a day, elegant, charming, saying he was going to change my life. And he did, just not the way I imagined. Ethan extended his hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. How long were you with him? 12 years. 12 years of small humiliations, of control disguised as care, of isolation disguised as protection. When I realized what had happened, it was too late. I no longer had family, no longer had friends, no longer had my own identity. And his. Your brother? Sarah closed her eyes, fighting against the memories that threatened to emerge. Mark was worse than Richard. At least Richard had a facade of civility. Mark was just hunger. Hunger for power, for dominance, for causing pain. She stopped, taking a deep breath before continuing. The night I killed Mark, I had made a decision. If he entered my room one more time, one of us wouldn't see the dawn. I was prepared to die. I couldn't stand living like that anymore. But when the time came, I discovered that I wanted to live more than I imagined. Ethan stopped the truck on the side of the road and pulled her into his arms. Sarah wasn't crying. She had passed the point of tears long ago, but her body trembled with the force of the memories. It's over, he murmured against her hair. All of it is over. Are you sure? She asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Because sometimes I feel like it will never really be over, like Richard is a shadow that will follow me forever. Ethan moved her away enough to look into her eyes. Then we'll create our own light, a light so bright that no shadow can exist near it. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile in days. Do you always speak in metaphors? Only when I'm nervous. And are you nervous? Ethan hesitated for a moment. I'm terrified. Not of Richard, not of the police, not of having to run. I'm terrified of the possibility of losing you. Sarah placed her hands on his face, forcing him to look into her eyes. You won't lose me. You won't. They arrived in Green Valley at the end of the 5th day of travel. The town was smaller than Sarah had imagined. Little more than a main street with some shops, a small church, and houses scattered among huge trees. There was a timeless air about the place, as if the last 50 years had passed without leaving. Many marks. Carly's Inn was at the edge of town, a construction of wood and stone that integrated perfectly with the surrounding landscape. There were well-tended gardens, a wide porch with hammocks, and the constant sound of running water coming from somewhere nearby. Sarah felt her stomach tighten when a woman came out of the main house. Carly was different from what she had imagined. Taller, thinner, with grey hair tied in a loose bun and gentle eyes. She wore a simple dress and sandals, but there was a natural elegance to her that Sarah immediately recognized as the kind of sophistication that comes from birth, not from money. Ethan, Carly said, and there was both relief and concern in her voice. When you called, I thought, I know. Ethan got out of the truck but maintained a respectful distance. Carly, this is Sarah. Sarah got out of the vehicle, suddenly conscious of her appearance after days on the road. But when Carly approached, there was no judgment in her eyes, only curiosity and something that could be compassion. You must be exhausted, Carly said. Come, let's go inside. You can explain everything after you've refreshed yourselves. This unexpected kindness almost undid Sarah. In recent years, she had become accustomed to hostility, suspicion, indifference. Genuine kindness was so rare that it almost hurt to receive. Carly led them to a cottage, separate from the main house. complete with a large bed, private bathroom, and a small kitchen. It was simple, but clean and welcoming. "You'll stay here," she said. "We have dinner at 7. Don't feel obligated to explain anything tonight if you don't want to." After Carly left, Sarah sat heavily on the bed. "She's good," she said, and there was surprise in her voice. "Yes," Ethan agreed, "she always was." "Why did you really divorce?" Ethan sat down beside her, running his hands through his hair. "Because when I came back from the war, I was broken. I couldn't touch anyone without having flashbacks. I couldn't sleep beside her without waking up screaming. I couldn't be the husband she deserved." "And now?" He looked at her, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. Hope mixed with fear. "Now I know it can be different, with the right person." Sarah extended her hand, gently touching his face. "Are you sure I'm the right person?" "Because, Ethan, I come with a lot of baggage, a lot of danger." "We all come with baggage, Sarah. The question is whether it's worth carrying together." She smiled, leaning in to kiss him softly. "It is." But even as they kissed, Sarah couldn't ignore a growing feeling of unease. They had reached a safe harbor, at least temporarily. Carly had welcomed them with open arms. For the first time in weeks, Sarah could breathe without feeling her lungs contracting with anxiety. So why did she feel as if the storm was just beginning? The answer came that night, during dinner. They were on the porch of the main house, eating a delicious stew that Carly had prepared, when she casually mentioned, "Oh, I forgot to mention, we had some visitors early today, men from town asking questions about you." Sarah felt her blood freeze. "What kind of questions?" Ethan asked, his voice carefully controlled. "They wanted to know if I knew a man named Ethan Santos and a woman named Sarah. They said they were from the police, but..." Carly shook her head. "They didn't look like police officers. They looked more like thugs," Sarah finished. Carly nodded. "I said I had never heard those names, but they said they'd be back tomorrow with a search warrant." Sarah and Ethan exchanged glances. Richard had found them again. No matter how far they ran, he always managed to track them down. "We'll leave right now," Sarah said, rising from her chair. "We won't put you in danger." "Where will you go?" Carly asked. "Sarah, you're exhausted. Ethan too. You can't keep running forever." We don't have a choice," Sarah replied, but her voice trembled. She was right. They couldn't continue running indefinitely. Sooner or later, they would have to face Richard. And when that happened, one of them wouldn't survive. The question was she prepared to do what would be necessary to protect the man she loved? And was Ethan prepared to discover how far she would be willing to go? Sarah stopped in the middle of the porch, her hands trembling slightly. The full moon illuminated Carly's garden, creating shadows that danced among the trees like ghosts of the past that refused to rest. Ethan rose, extending his hand to her, but Sarah shook her head. "No," her voice cut through the night with a firmness that surprised even herself. "Enough running." Carly and Ethan watched her, recognizing something different in her posture, in her eyes. Sarah was no longer the broken woman that Ethan had found on the road, nor the frightened fugitive who had arrived in Green Valley a few hours before. She was something new, something dangerous. "Sarah," Ethan said carefully. "What are you thinking?" She turned to him, and in the moonlight her eyes shone with an iron determination. "I'm thinking that Richard is right about one thing. I can't run forever. But he's wrong about everything else. I'm not the woman he knew anymore, and it's time to show him that." Carly leaned forward in her chair. "Sarah, dear, you can't be thinking of facing him directly. He has men, resources. He has bought men and dirty resources, Sarah shot back. But I have something he never had. The truth on my side. Ethan approached her, his eyes searching for hers in the darkness. Explain. Sarah took a deep breath, organizing the thoughts that had been forming in her mind since they learned that Richard had found them again. During all the years I lived with Richard, I learned his secrets. I knew about the shady business, about the dirty money, about the corrupt contacts in the police. I never used that information because I was afraid, because I was broken, but I'm not anymore. She started pacing back and forth across the porch, the energy of the decision running through her veins like electricity. Richard always controlled me through fear. Fear that no one would believe me, fear that I would be seen as a murderer, fear that I wouldn't be able to survive alone. But I've already killed a man to defend myself. I've already survived alone. And now, she looked at Ethan, I have someone who believes in me. Carly rose, moving to stand beside Ethan. What exactly are you proposing? Sarah stopped pacing and turned to face them both. I'm going to make Richard come to me, alone, and when he arrives, I'm going to end this once and for all. Bah, Sarah, that's... Ethan began, but she interrupted him. Necessary? Ethan, you said it yourself. Men like Richard don't give up. They just change tactics. If I don't stop this now, he'll spend the rest of his life hunting us. We'll grow. Old looking over our shoulders, always running, always afraid. Ethan studied her face in the faint light. Sarah was right, and he knew it, but the idea of deliberately putting her in danger went against all his instincts. Then we'll do this together, he finally said. No. Sarah's response was immediate and firm. This is between him and me. It always has been. Sarah, Ethan, if you're there, he'll use it against me. He'll blackmail me. He'll threaten to hurt you. I need to be alone for this to work. Carly, who had remained quiet during the exchange, finally spoke. There's an old cabin on the property. It's about 2 miles from here near the river. It's isolated, but I know all the paths. If you can lure him there... Sarah turned to her, recognizing an unexpected ally. You would help us? Dear, any man who pursues a woman like this doesn't deserve my courtesy. Besides, Carly looked at Ethan, I've never seen my ex-husband so alive as he is with you. That's worth protecting. In the hours that followed, the three of them elaborated a plan. Sarah would call Richard, saying she was ready to surrender, but that she wanted to do it on her own terms. She would choose the location, the isolated cabin, and insist that he come alone. Richard, arrogant as always, would probably agree, confident that he could control her as he always did. And if he doesn't come alone? Ethan asked as they checked the details for the 3rd time. Then we improvise, Sarah replied, checking the gun that Ethan had insisted she take. But I know Richard. He'll want to be alone with me for the grand moment of triumph. When the sun began to rise, tinting the sky pink and gold, Sarah made the call. Richard! Her voice was calm, controlled. It's me! On the other end of the line, she heard his breathing change, become faster. Sarah finally saw reason. I saw that you'll never stop, so let's end this. Where are you? Sarah gave the coordinates of the cabin, explaining how to get there. And Richard, she added before hanging up, come alone. If I see any of your thugs, I'll disappear again, and this time you'll never find me. How can I be sure you won't? Run away! Sarah looked out the window where Ethan was tending to the garden, appearing normal to any distant observer. Because I'm tired of running. See you at noon. The time until noon passed simultaneously, too quickly and too slowly. Sarah took a long shower, put on clean clothes, ate a breakfast she could barely taste, Ethan tried to convince her one more time to let him accompany her, but she was inflexible. "You'll be close enough to hear if I need help," she said, gently touching his face. "But I need to do this alone, Ethan. I need to prove to myself that I can." At 11:30, Sarah began walking to the cabin. It was a beautiful morning, with birds singing in the trees and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. It seemed ironic that such a beautiful day could be the setting for a confrontation that would determine the rest of her life. The cabin was exactly as Carly had described, small, rustic, surrounded by dense trees. The river ran nearby, its constant sound creating a natural soundtrack. Sarah entered and checked the environment. A main room with a fireplace, a small bedroom, a basic kitchen. Several windows offered escape routes if necessary. She chose a position near the main door where she could see Richard arrive, but also have quick access to the back exit if things got out of control. Richard arrived exactly at noon, alone as promised. Sarah watched him through the window as he parked a black car and approached the cabin. He seemed confident, almost casual, as if he were going to pick up something that belonged to him. When he entered, Sarah was standing in the center of the room, her hands relaxed at her sides, the gun hidden behind her back. "Sarah," he said, and there was triumph in his voice. "Finally." She studied him for a moment. Richard looked older, more tired than she remembered. The hunt of the last few months had taken its toll. "Finally," she agreed. "Let's end this." Richard smiled, beginning to approach her. "I always knew you'd come back to me. Women like you always come back. You can pretend you're strong, independent, but in the end you always need a man to take care of you." Sarah let him come closer, each word he said feeding the controlled anger that grew inside her. "You know what irritates me most about you, Sarah? It's that you made everyone believe you were a victim. Poor Sarah, mistreated by the cruel boyfriend, but I know the truth. I know you liked it." "Liked it?" Sarah's voice was dangerously low. "The drama, the intensity, being the center of attention. You killed my brother not in self-defense, but because you wanted to see if you could. You wanted to know what it was like to have power over someone's life and death." Sarah laughed, a low sound, without humor. "It's impressive how you manage to distort everything to fit your narrative. Mark raped me, Richard, every night, and when I begged for your help, you said I should feel honored." Richard shook his head, as if she were a stubborn child. "You dramatize everything. Mark was disciplining you, teaching you your place. If you had been a good girl..." "If I had been a good girl, I would be dead now," Sarah interrupted. "Dead inside, if not outside." Richard was close enough now to touch her. He extended his hand as if to caress her face, but Sarah moved away. "Don't touch me." "Sarah, enough of this nonsense. You're mine. You always have been. And now that we're done with this game of running away, we can go back to normal." "Normal?" Sarah laughed again, and this time there was something genuinely amusing in the sound. "Richard, do you really think that after all this, after months of running, of finding a man who treats me like a human being, I'm just going to go back to you?" Richard's expression began to change, confidence giving way to irritation. "Ah, yes, the farmer. You think he really cares about you? Men like him amuse themselves with women like you, but don't care to stay. When he gets tired of your dramas, your nightmares, your baggage, he'll abandon you and you'll be alone again." "You're wrong," Sarah said simply. "Ethan knows me, accepts me, truly loves me." "Love?" Richard spat the word as if it were poison. "You don't know what love is. You confuse obsession with love, drama with passion. I offered you a good life, Sarah, money, status, security, and you threw it all away for what? For wounded pride? I threw it away because it was slowly killing me, Sarah replied, her voice growing in intensity. You isolated me from everyone who cared about me, made me believe I was worth nothing without you, turned me into a doll that existed only for your pleasure and convenience. Richard took a threatening step toward her. I made you somebody. When I met you, you were a ghetto girl with no future, serving hamburgers. I gave you everything. You took everything from me, Sarah shot back. My identity, my independence, my self-esteem, and then you allowed your brother to violate me, night after night, because it was convenient for you. Enough! Richard exploded, the mask of civility finally falling. Enough of this pathetic victimization. You're going to come with me now, or I'll make you remember your place. He lunged forward, but Sarah was ready. She dodged, pulling the gun from behind her back in a fluid movement. No, she said, pointing the gun at his chest. My place is where I choose it to be, and it will never be at your side again. Richard stopped, but there was no fear in his only anger and disbelief. You won't kill me, Sarah. You don't have the courage. Indeed, I've already killed a man to defend myself, she reminded him, and I would do it again. Mark was different. He was attacking you. You were desperate. Now you're in control, thinking clearly. You're not a cold-blooded killer. Sarah studied him for a long moment. He was right. She wasn't a cold-blooded killer, but she was also no longer the frightened, broken woman he had controlled for so long. You're right, she finally said. I won't kill you in cold blood, but I'll do something worse to you. Richard frowned, confused. Sarah smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm going to ignore you. I'm going to go on with my life, be happy with Ethan, build something beautiful and real, and you'll be left alone, consumed by anger and obsession, realizing that you never had the power over me that you thought you had. You think you can simply ignore me? I have contacts in the police, Sarah. I can make your life a living hell. Oh, about that. Sarah kept the gun pointed at him while using her free hand to pick up an envelope she had left on a nearby table. Do you remember all that documentation I had access to when I lived with you? All those conversations I witnessed? All those business deals you thought I didn't understand? The color began to drain from Richard's face. I copied everything. Documents, recordings, photographs. Enough evidence to put you and half your corrupt contacts in jail for the next 20 years. Sarah threw the envelope on the floor between them. Everything is there. And copies are in safe places, with instructions to be delivered to the press and the federal police, if anything happens to me or Ethan. Richard looked at the envelope, as if it were a venomous snake. You can't. I can, and I already have. You see, Richard, while you thought you were hunting me, I was preparing to completely destroy you if necessary. Sarah took a step back, keeping the gun steady. So here are the new rules. You're going to leave here and never try to find me again. Never send your men after me again. Never speak my name again. And if I find out you're trying to interfere in my life in any way, this information goes straight to the authorities. Richard remained silent for a long moment, processing the complete reversal of the situation. And if I simply kill you here and now? He finally asked. Sarah smiled again, and this time there was genuine amusement in her expression. Besides the fact that I'm armed and you're not, Ethan is waiting for my signal. If I don't appear in an hour, he comes looking, and he won't. Be alone. As if to confirm her words, the distant sound of an engine could be heard approaching. In fact, Sarah said, tilting her head slightly to listen better, it seems my time is up. Richard looked desperately around, like a cornered animal looking for a way out. This doesn't end here, Sarah. Yes, it does. Her voice was firm, final, because I'm no longer the woman you knew. I'm someone new, someone stronger, and you're just a ghost from my past that I've finally learned to exorcise." The sound of the engine was closer. Now, Richard knew he had lost, that his only option was to retreat and try to minimize the damage. "You'll regret this," he said, moving toward the door. "The only thing I regret," Sarah replied, "is having taken so long to realize that I always had the power to stop you." Richard left the cabin without saying anything more. Sarah watched him through the window as he walked quickly to the car, his back bent in defeat. She kept the gun pointed until he disappeared on the road, swallowed by the forest. Only then did her legs fail. Sarah leaned against the wall, the adrenaline finally diminishing, leaving her trembling but triumphant. The engine sound she had heard belonged to Ethan's truck. He arrived at the cabin a few minutes later, jumping out of the vehicle before even stopping it completely. "Sarah!" He ran to her, pulling her into his arms. "Are you okay? I heard voices, and then I saw Richard leaving." "It's over," she whispered against his chest. "It's finally over." Ethan held her tightly, as if he wanted to make sure she was real, that she was safe. "What happened? How did you—" "I remembered who I am." Sarah moved away enough to look into his eyes. "Not the broken woman that Richard created, but the strong woman I always was, underneath everything." They remained embraced for a long moment, absorbing the reality that they were finally free. "And now?" Ethan asked. Sarah smiled, a true smile, full of possibilities. "Now we live. Really live." 6 months later, Sarah was standing on the porch of a small house that she and Ethan had built together on a hill overlooking the river. She wore a simple cotton dress and had dirt under her nails from helping in the garden they were cultivating. Ethan appeared at her side, putting his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Sarah leaned against him, feeling the solidity of his body, the security of his embrace. "I was thinking that for the first time in my life, when I think about the future, I don't feel afraid." Ethan kissed her softly on the top of her head. "And what do you feel?" Sarah smiled, watching the sun set over the distant mountains, painting the sky gold and pink. "Hope. A lot of hope." And for the first time in her life, Sarah Santos, she had adopted Ethan's surname after a simple wedding in the small church in Green Valley, woke up every morning eager for what the day might bring, instead of afraid of what might go wrong. Richard never sought her out again. The information she had compiled about his illegal business never needed to be used, but she knew she had it, and that certainty was enough to maintain her peace of mind. Sarah had learned the most important lesson of her life. True power doesn't come from dominating others, but from knowing yourself completely and loving yourself enough to never accept less than you deserve. And she deserved a lot. She deserved true love, respect, kindness, companionship. She deserved to wake up beside a man who saw her strength as something to be admired, not broken. She deserved to build a life based on genuine choices, not on fear. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah and Ethan entered their house, their true home, built on foundations of mutual love and respect. And for the first time in her life, when the door closed behind them, it wasn't to keep her prisoner, but to protect the happiness they had built together. The past had finally stayed where it belonged,